spend the last few moments to scratch again the surface about what does that all mean for the reform debate. To me, two key words are multipolarity and multilateralism. Multipolarity means the United Nations Security Council must not have only a Western avenue, a Western agenda. It must be a global agenda. If we are interested in HIV/AIDS and in terrorism, and the other half of the world is interested in poverty reduction and in finding ways in which we treat each other with greater dignity and tolerance, that must also be on the agenda. A more multipolar situation. It cannot be that we accept, and again, forgive me, that I quote yet again John Bolton. But John Bolton said on the 15th of November last year, the United Nations must be more interested in US priorities. Otherwise, we go elsewhere. I wonder whether he goes to Louisiana or to... where does he go? There is no other body of this kind. But anyway, this is said by the man who's supposed to represent his country at an international body. That isn't how it goes. I don't know where you stand politically, what you think about Lloyd Exworthy. I think a lot about him from an international perspective because he came into the UN Security Council in 1999 and he said quite opposite from what John Bolton said. The United Nations must make sure that it acts for the benefit of the international community and not for the interest of individual member states. And he was kind, wasn't he, that he added an S to member states. Because what he really meant was the big brother there that was selfish. And that is, I think, important to remember. The Mexican delegate, I had to read this over and over again to make sure that I read the year 1945. It was said in 1945. If it was said yesterday or last year or even 10 years ago, I wouldn't quote it here. But what he said in 1945 is we have designed an organization which will control the mice, but the tigers are still on the loose. That was 45. Now, how much are these tigers on the loose today? And that is all pointing the finger to what Kofi Annan now has so strongly initiated, and that is a reform debate which fell asleep in the 1980s, sponsored by the Scandinavian countries, but now it's on the table again, thank God, and it will be a terribly long road on which to travel to convince the US that it must rejoin this international community of nations, that the John Bolton approach cannot possibly lead us anywhere, that countries are fed up with this hegemony. I'm kind now, the Western approach. I really don't have much tolerance or much acceptance of what I read by Donald Rumsfeld. But he did say something recently with which I agree. He said, man and the turtle are very much alike. Neither makes any progress without sticking the neck out. Well, the UN has now to stick the neck out. The Secretary General has to stick the neck out, and he is doing that. And he is saying things in his reports and his proposals that are the important beginning of a debate on a new architecture for the Security Council, for example, the division of labor between the General Assembly and the Security Council. Unfortunately, he does not include the International Court of Justice. There's also a need to take into account the existence of that court in The Hague in dividing the labor. The Security Council has become a dictatorship. They usurped the power into this council, and we're handling all the issues that normally would be distributed maybe to some other agencies. And so that debate is maybe the most difficult debate, the Security Council debate. It is there, it involves the veto, should the veto continue. Well, there is much more to say. I've talked already. I always do that, too long.
The problem in this country with the United Nations and with the responsibility to protect doctrine, because it's leading Canada to an interventionist role in the world similar to the United States. We now have Canadian forces in Afghanistan, and we've had Canada participate in the overthrow of the government of Haiti. So I am not convinced that this institution, under whose name many of these illegal and criminal acts are being carried out, can be reformed as you speak of.
In a way, you make a case for reform. I agree with you that the United Nations isn't meeting our expectations and the needs, urgent needs. So if the reform experiment fails, it may indeed be that the people around the world take over and take into the hand what normally should be the responsibility of governments. I didn't say to you, by the way, that the Secretary General also proposes that governments should much more interact with civil society. Yes, and your voice is very important. And your voice has, I didn't know this until not too long ago, that our voices in this room, for example, two people, he and I, we together form a group. Two people form a group. Two groups under the Hague Convention have two people have a legal value. A court must hear us. There's a clause called the Martens Clause in the Hague Convention, which makes that point. So the people must speak out more.
I have two questions, so you can take your choice. The first is, I just would like you to say a bit more about what you think of sanctions in general. You mentioned that after the Kuwait invasion, Iraq should have had some kind of sanction regime, but then it went wrong. You didn't exactly clarify why it went wrong.
Okay.
And, leading up to the war, how corrupted do you think the oil for food program had become?
The British House of Commons wrote a report in which they concluded in 2000 comprehensive economic sanctions as imposed on Iraq should never ever be used again. So now there is much more readiness to eliminate that approach from the toolbox in the UN. There is a handbook now on smart sanctions that the UN uses to leave sanctions, targeted, smart, intelligent sanctions as a tool to punish leaders that have gone astray. I think for the moment I would say yes, can stay.
What would be an example of a
targeted sanction? Could be a country that, let's say targeted sanctions in Iraq could have meant a military embargo, no visas, travel, money frozen, little stuff like that, but mainly the military embargo. But civilian goods, monitored, could have come in freely. That would, to me, have been a better way than including everything from sheets of music to a school chair. That would have been a better approach. Now, I'm often asked about and I didn't mention it, I could have and I should have maybe, the corruption in the Oil for Food program. Now, the corruption in the Oil for Food program as analyzed by the Volcker Commission in 5 reports shows that only 3 individuals were identified who, as UN officials, have done something that is in violation of their status as international civil servants. $64 billion, 3 people. This is not surprising. Okay, now you want to say something. Say it.
Do you think there were only 3 people?
I can tell you one thing. It's a public impression that we had something to do with the ordering, with the oil contracts. I didn't even know until 2 years ago that there was something called an oil coupon. Kickbacks, surcharges. I don't think in my office in Baghdad there was a single individual who had anything to do with that, because we had nothing to do with the contracts. That doesn't mean that certain units at headquarters that were processing supply clearances and whatever, that something could have gone wrong. Maybe. But the Volcker Commission, ladies and gentlemen, spending $35 million of Iraqi oil money. I don't know whether you're aware of that this whole inquiry was financed again with Iraqi oil money.